Namaskar, my name's Amal Jacobson. This is Anandamurti 101. It's a channel in which I try to explore the philosophy of Shrii Shrii Anandamurti and go through it step by step. And today I want to talk about Purusa and Prakrti, which are easily some of the most important concepts in Anandamurti's philosophy that don't actually originally come from Anandamurti. They come from a philosophy known as Sankhya. By many considerations, the oldest philosophy in the entire world, goes back more than 3,000 years. But although Anandamurti borrows those terms from Sankhya, he has a very different spin on Purusa and Prakrti that are worth getting into because they're really sophisticated and interesting, and they're absolutely the bedrock for understanding the entire picture of tantric philosophy, especially in Anandamurti's consideration. So Purusa and Prakrti can be thought of as two sides of one piece of paper in Anandamurti's conception. They are not two separate entities. They are two aspects of one singular thing. If you were to sum up Anandamurti's philosophy in one sentence, it would be fair to sum it up as follows: that this entire cosmos, with its endless diversity, with all of the solar systems and galaxies, is actually a singular event arising from a singular consciousness that is coming to know itself through the diversity of expressions in this cosmos. You are that singular consciousness coming to know itself through your unique expression. That singular self is reflected within your individual person as the Atman. It's important to remember that when we're talking about the Atman in Anandamurti's philosophy, although it's often translated to mean the self, we're not talking about the self in terms of your personality, your likes and dislikes, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation. We're talking about a pure consciousness that is deep within the core of even your own sense of I exist, okay? It is totally deep, beyond and deeper than everything we tend to think of when we think of our little selves, okay? And that Atman, reflected as it is in every single person, in all the animals, in all the plants, okay? That singular Atman that is coming to know itself through each of its expressions, you may call that Purusa. Purusa meaning consciousness, or that which lies quiescent within an entity, something that is hiding deep, 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 deep within. That pure consciousness is Purusa. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is Prakrti, and Prakrti can be thought of as the energy or qualities of that consciousness, of that Purusa. What is the nature of that consciousness? The nature of that consciousness is to, from that origin of one, it creates diversity. It creates the many, okay? So Prakrti acts upon Purusa, acts upon consciousness, and binds it and qualifies it and renders it into these functional aspects that you can see within your own mind. So for example, in the last video, What is the Atman? We talked about the different aspects of the mind. There was the Atman, which is the pure consciousness within, and then arising out of that is the Mahat, the sense of existence. I exist. And now that you have a sense that I exist, you have a sense of doership. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. That's the part of yourself that makes you feel like you are distinct or different from others. And that in Sanskrit is known as the Aham. And then now that you have a will, now that you want to do this and not that, there's a portion of the mind that has to become the objects of perception so that you can assimilate information from the external world. And that objective part of the mind that becomes the objects of perception is known as the chitta in Sanskrit. And so you can see that out of that pure consciousness of the Atman, there are three aspects of mind. Similarly, those three aspects of the mind correspond with what are known as the three aspects of Prakrti. These are known in Sanskrit as the gunas. You may have heard of those terms before, the gunas. The gunas are the trifarious expressions of Prakrti, the ways in which Prakrti will bind or act upon Purusha to make Purusha functional as we see in the mind. Okay, so that purest expression of the mind that even goes beyond your sense that I am an individual different from other individuals, that purest chamber of the mind, the Mahat, that sense of I exist, that is caused by the subtlest guna acting upon that pure Purusha, that pure consciousness. And that subtlest of the gunas is known as Sattva guna in Sanskrit. Anandamurti has an English term that he will also use known as sentient principle. Okay, and that is responsible for the creation of the Mahat out of the Atman, the sense of I exist out of that purest consciousness. Okay, but Prakrti continues to act upon Purusha even after the creation of the Mahat, even after you have a sense of I exist. Out of that is a sort of ego, a sense that I am different from others. I do this, I don't do that. I want this, I don't want that. That aham. And that aham is caused by what is known as Rajaguna, the second aspect of Prakrti, which is binding Purusha further. Out of the Mahat comes the aham. Out of the sense of I exist comes the sense of I do. Okay, that's a little bit cruder of an expression than I exist. It's not quite as deep, right? It's a little bit more at the surface. And so similarly, Rajaguna is a little bit of a cruder expression of Prakrti than Sattva guna. And the English term that Anandamurti uses for Rajaguna is known as the mutative principle in his philosophy. We'll return to these, by the way, at the end so I can sort of sum them up a little bit more. That last chamber of the mind, the objective part of the mind, the part of your mind that literally has to become the video that you were watching in order for you to understand the video and for you to take in that information, that part of the mind which is known as the Chitta in Anandamurti's philosophy, is the result of the Tamaguna, the crudest aspect of Prakrti, continually qualifying Purusha. Even more out of the aham will come the chitta. That is a result of tamaguna acting upon the aham and binding the mind further and giving it a sort of objective completion. That is a result, again, of tamaguna, and the English term that Anandamurti uses for that is the static principle, the crudest manifestation of Prakrti. Okay, so those three aspects of Prakrti, Sattvaguna, Rajaguna, Tamaguna, sentient principle, mutative principle, and static principle, those three gunas together are called Prakrti in Sanskrit. And so Purusha and Prakrti are two aspects of one singular thing in Anandamurti's philosophy. Sattvaguna, or sentient principle, is responsible for the subtlest cognition of the mind. It represents peace and tranquility and serenity. A sattvic place or a sentient place would be any place that makes you feel calm and at ease and allows the subtlest aspects of your consciousness to express themselves. Rajaguna, or mutative principle, is an extremely active and dynamic principle. Okay, it represents change and movement and action. Okay, Rajaguna is what moves things forward or forces something towards its completion. Okay, we see that, of course, in the mind itself, where the aham is the sense of doership. It's the part of the mind that has a will to do this and don't do that. Tamaguna, on the other hand, or static principle, being the crudest aspect of Prakrti, represents dullness, slowness, sleep, timidity, shyness, even decomposition and death. Those are all very tamasic, okay? And although we tend to look at tamaguna as bad, it's important to remember that all these three aspects are necessary in life, okay? Each have their own respective time and place within our own lives, okay? We have moments in our lives, maybe when we sit down to meditate or we go on a hike and we are on a hillside watching the sunset, that can feel very sattvic, very sentient and restorative to our souls. But we also need that dose of Rajaguna, that mutative principle, to get us moving and to bring us out into the world and get us the things that we need to get. And similarly, at the end of every single night, all of us need to go to sleep and rest. There's also that nighttime portion that many of us are averse to. But of course, death is also a part of life. And so Tamaguna is as necessary as the other gunas as well, as much as it gets a bad rap. These two aspects, Purusa and Prakrti, constitute the two different aspects of the self that comes to know itself through the diverse expressions of the cosmos. And you can see that reflected in the individual mind. The individual Purusha, as it is reflected in an individual person, there's the Atman, the pure consciousness that hides behind the mind or deep within the mind, and then it comes to know itself through the Mahat, the Aham, and the Chitta, which are the result of Prakrti acting upon that Purusha, qualifying it, binding it, and thus giving it a functional aspect so that the Atman can come to know itself through you. Through each animal and plant and human and every single expression in this entire universe, all of it is that singular Purusha coming to know itself with the help of its own qualities, with the help of its own Prakrti, in order to understand its own fundamental nature. Okay? And so that, very briefly, is Purusha and Prakrti, and Anandamurti uses those concepts to answer questions that we will deal with in later videos, such as the creation of matter, the creation of mind out of matter, and many other things, even regarding diet and biopsychology and the practical aspects of day-to-day life, according to yogic or tantric philosophy. So stay tuned for those future videos, okay? I hope you got something out of this. Please feel free to leave me any comments or feedback. I read those, I try to respond to them. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so hopefully other people might be able to be exposed to Anandamurti's philosophy. And thank you very much for your time. Namaskar.